Welcome to Kernels of Truth, brought to you by Progress Kentucky. Thank you so much for joining us. This week, we're going to touch on a few federal stories, specifically how a Supreme Court case from Oregon could potentially impact our political landscape here in Kentucky. Doug is going to bring you the deep dive into our list of the very worst bills of the legislature, which we're going to let you vote on to pick the actual worst legislative idea of the session. And then we're going to close with our call to action. But first, are you ready to help turn Kentucky purple? I bet you are. Let's think back a few Novembers, shall we? Last November, we reelected Andy Beshear, a great moment for our Commonwealth. The November before that, we rejected an effort to strip abortion protections from our state constitution, which apparently did nothing to allow for abortion in our state. But when push comes to shove, folks in Kentucky come together for a kinder, compassionate Commonwealth. Unfortunately, there's still supermajorities in Frankfort that just don't care about making regular folks' lives a bit better and are laser focused on giving tax cuts to rich folks and sending whatever's left over to private schools. It's clear there's still lots of work to do in our state to win better electoral outcomes for our Commonwealth. Between now and this November, 195 days from now, we're going to be focused on just that. We hope you'll support Progress Kentucky in our campaign for a more compassionate Commonwealth. Make a contribution right now via our secure online website. Act Blue to help turn Kentucky purple. $5, $50, $500. It all adds up. It's all welcome. And unfortunately, none of it is tax deductible. So let's check in with our co-host. Really excited to have my friend Doug joining us today. Doug, how are you doing?
Sorry. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. So I know we usually check in. I'll admit I didn't really think about a protest sign, but I think as I'm kind of watching the news, I'm just protesting Trump, right? Because it's just unavoidable. He's everywhere I look. He's taken over the national media landscape once again, which really is unfortunate because I kind of, allowed myself to forget all about Stormy Daniels and David Pecker. But now that's everywhere I turn, which I'm going to protest that because it's not fair. It's cruel and unusual punishment.
Yes, I understand that. You got Stormy and you got Pecker and you got Trump. What else can you say?
What a cast of characters. All right, Doug, what do you got? Anything you're protesting today?
I have a sign as always. I'm coming to you from Harrison County, Kentucky. In Lexington, they have what they call bluegrass, but in Harrison County, we have the prettiest green grass. So you should come visit Harrison County and see this wonderful green grass we've got.
Okay.
My sign says, let's make the Republican-controlled legislature reap what they sow in November 2024.
Nice. Yeah, let's hold them accountable. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to jump into news of the week. I think you've got the first story, and it is a humdinger. It's really 10 stories rolled into one. So take it away, Doug.
Yes, thank you so very much. If you watched COT in the last few weeks, you're aware that we were tracking bad bills. And now we want to provide an update, plus give you an opportunity to weigh in on what we call the worst of the worst. We selected 10 bills, and you can vote on your view of the worst of the worst. But first, let me give you a recap of our bills. Let's start with House Bill 5. I'm quoting from the Kentucky Land article by one of our faves, Terry Carter. If there is a photo that defines Kentucky's 2024 regular session, it is a smiling Secretary of State Michael Adams signing House Bill 5, a sprawling, data questionable, pro-incarceration bill with an unknown sky's the limit budget, overriding the governor's veto in the Capitol Rotunda, surrounded by more than 24 applauding supporters and lawmakers, all white. Adams quipped, "I feel safer already." The sponsors called this the Safer Kentucky Act, and I refer to it as the Incarcerate Kentucky Act. Next up is Senate Bill 20. This bill would automatically transfer anyone 15 years or older with a Class A, B, or C felony to adult court. It also stipulates that a firearm, functional or not, must have been used during the offense. So a 15-year-old is, their brain is developed enough to be thrown into jail, but that same 15-year-old would not be able to decide their gender or have any gender affirming type things because they pass bills against that kind of thing. Next up is HB 2. Kentucky House Democrats said they felt like they were shut out during floor debate on HB 2. It's also known as the school choice bill. HB 2 would put a constitutional amendment to the voters of Kentucky asking if they want to change the Constitution to allow the legislature to pass laws related to funding for schools. Democrats wanted to bring up concerns on whether this would open the door for school vouchers if it appears on the ballot and is approved by voters. House Speaker David Osborne would not allow it. We are boxed in here with the realities of what we're allowed to talk about and what we're not allowed to talk about when it comes to this ballot measure and what we're asking the citizens of Kentucky to vote on, said Representative Chad All, Democrat from Lexington. HB 2 is one of the two constitutional amendments passed this legislative session. Again, if it's approved by the voters this coming November, the legislature will be able to write laws to divert public school funds to private and church schools. Progress Kentucky will be working hard to defeat this atrocious bill. I would think that any Democrat running for election in November would be certain to cite their opponent's views on giving money to private schools. I think the public will vote this down if they understand what the bill is about. Those legislators who supported the effort must be held accountable at the ballot box. Next up is Senate Bill 16. This one will allow ag operations to prohibit anyone from reporting on abusive practices by ag operations. And this bill is fully supported by none other than Tyson Foods. It also prohibits the flying of drones above any ag producing properties. Technically, the Federal Aviation Commission owns the airspace and allows public usage in most areas, excluding around airports and what the federal government refers to as key infrastructure areas. So in Kentucky, now under this bill, drones are not allowed over chicken farms because these are now designated as key infrastructure areas. I want to read from an op-ed by Todd Blevins. Labor unions, environmental groups, animal welfare organizations, free speech groups, and the Kentucky Press Association have all voiced their concerns. SB 16 isn't about protecting farms or businesses operating in good faith and consistent with good values. It is about silencing those who, in the public interest, might expose wrongdoing by multinational conglomerates in relation to things like workplace safety, human health, food security, and animal cruelty. Next up is HB 18. Under HB 18, landlords can refuse to rent to tenants who pay with public housing assistance, such as Section 8 vouchers. It also stops cities like Louisville and Lexington from enforcing their current bans on housing and source of income discrimination. The Republicans are in favor of local control until they are not in favor of local control. Next up is SB 2, Guardians for Schools, packing heat. I mean, what could go wrong? We now can have armed guards in school, bringing guns into our schools as opposed to passing laws to keep guns out of schools. At least we are not Tennessee yet. Their Republican-controlled legislature just passed a bill that allows teachers to carry in the classroom. Additionally, our school personnel can be armed. There is no requirement for parents to know which of their teachers are packing. There are requirements for training, a background check, an annual psych exam, a written authorization from the principal. But what could go wrong? A student overpowers someone who is packing. A teacher goes ballistic after one more time. The next up is a trifecta of bills. These needed to be in there, but I couldn't really separate them out. They all relate to spending. Why are these on the list? My primary source on this one is from the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy, another one of our partners. The final budget agreement spends significant dollars out of the Budget Reserve Trust Fund, primarily on infrastructure and very specific local projects. However, it remains largely austere when it comes to meeting other needs, lacking adequate funds for education, childcare, housing, state and school employee raises, a retiree cost of living adjustment, and other areas, despite additional ongoing funds being available. All of this is related to the Republican-controlled legislature's plan to lower the Kentucky income tax rate to 0. Kansas tried this, and it was an economic disaster, and they reverted back. Kentucky is headed full steam ahead on the runaway train that is our legislature. Next up is HB 136. This bill is an attack on the Air Control Board in Jefferson County, quoting from a Kentucky Lantern article written by Liam Niemeyer. Kentucky lawmakers in the House of Representatives passed a bill Tuesday that would prevent Louisville's Air Pollution Authority from issuing fines against industries that self-disclose violations of federal pollution regulations. The bill was sponsored by Representative Jared Bauman. Bauman works for the Lubrizol Corporation, a chemical manufacturing company with an operation in Louisville that is regulated by the APCD. Bauman had received an advisory opinion from the legislature's Ethics Commission when he filed the bill that stated there was no conflict of interest with him sponsoring the legislation. And why is that? You would think somebody who worked for a company that is going to get some feel-good stuff, it wouldn't be allowed. But because the bill affected industry as a whole, not just his employer. Next up is HB 174. HB 174 allows parental access of medical records of their children to determine whether or not they have issues. Reading from the law, the parent of a patient who is under the age of 18 or a patient's personal representative on behalf of the patient who is under the age of 18 shall have the right to access the patient's health information maintained by a healthcare provider in a medical record unless prohibited under the Federal Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996 or any other federal or state law. Finally, a late addition to keep it to an even 10 choices. Senate Bill 349. This was backed by Senate President Robert Stivers, Republican Manchester, and primarily sponsored by Senator Robbie Mills, Republican Henderson. Let me just mention something about Senator Robbie Mills. He has received numerous contributions from a coal baron in Kentucky. This would create a new review commission that utilities would have to provide notice to before filing requests to the state's utility regulator to retire a fossil fuel-fired power plant. The bill creates unnecessary bureaucracy to impede retirement requests and keep aging, uneconomical coal-fired plants on the grid. Ratepayers could be burdened with the cost of unnecessarily extending the life of coal-fired plants. Critics have also honed in on what they see as the problematic makeup of the commission, which would include industry representatives from a number of energy sources, but favor the fossil fuels, coal, and natural gas. We already have a PSC, We don't need this new bureaucracy dominated by the coal industry to protect its own interest and add additional hurdles to reduce our cost of power. So, we would like for you to vote what you think is the worst bill of the 2024 Kentucky General Assembly. We do have a bit.ly link in the chat, and if you're watching this later, you can find that bit.ly link, and please take an opportunity to vote on the bills. And once we receive those votes, we will let you know what you think. Back to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Doug, for that comprehensive rundown. It was, tough to pick just 10. They definitely did a lot of damage this session for sure.
I do want to say one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
We just covered 10 really bad bills, and there were a lot of other bad bills that were passed. Guess how many Democratic sponsored bills were passed in this last session?
Was it more than we highlighted in the bad bill list?
Actually, it was less.
So yeah, it's under 10.
7.
Well, if you're the minority party and you're a super minority, what do you expect, right?
Right.
Especially with that crew. They won't even, I think they basically run the show with the idea that they're not going to bring up a bill unless it has a majority support of their own caucus, right? So really just a bummer that they stand in the way of good legislation because it's not the name, doesn't have a Republican name behind it. Although I do know we've talked to a number of Democratic lawmakers, and they've figured out the game and make friends across the aisle and go, "Hey, isn't this a great bill? Don't you want this bill? You could totally take this bill, and let's just get it moving, right?" Because that's the way that minority party is. They're looking for the best of this Commonwealth. They're not doing it for ego and for recognition necessarily. So, all right. Well, do you have a favorite? I know your vote is secret, but you can always tell people if you want, right? No one's going to require you to tell them.
I think my favorite would probably be the Constitution. The favorite worst bill,
yes,
would be the constitutional amendment.
Yeah,
I don't think it will pass, but people need to understand what it's about, because it doesn't say in there that you're voting to provide vouchers, and that's basically what I believe this will lead to. If that passes, they will then be able to pass legislation that says the rich folks can get vouchers if they want them, and then they can have vouchers to go to their favorite private school.
Yeah, it's an effort to defund public school, public education.
Yes.
It's one more transfer of wealth from public tax dollars to private entities that are not really accountable and won't provide the same level of services, right? It's a bad idea. I'm with you on that one for sure. All right, so let's go ahead. We've shared the link. Everyone go vote. Pick your worst bill of the session. And we're going to now move into, I'm going to do a bit of a national news roundup. I know we laser focus our energy on this show on Kentucky's politics, because I don't think enough time and energy is focused on Kentucky's politics, but they're out of session. So we thought we'd remind you of some pretty important federal stuff that's happening, specifically starting off with the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court this week heard a case from Grants Pass, Oregon, that will decide if ticketing homeless people amounts to cruel and unusual punishment. The decision could have a significant impact on HB 5, which was, of course, passed over the governor's veto. And Doug just started off his roundup with that one. But, makes it a crime to camp in public. So very much related to this. Unfortunately, those court watchers said it sounded like the Supreme Court majority was fairly skeptical whether it would be cruel and unusual punishment to ticket people from camping in public. So despite the fact that the Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against the city's law, it seems very likely the Supreme Court will rule for the city. And that means we'll have one less angle to get rid of the law against camping if you're homeless. So, and then, of course, the big story this week was the the big aid packages for Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, TikTok ban, like lots of crazy stuff happened because Mike Johnson figured out a way forward. On that, the Mitch voted yes for the package. He took to the floor to advocate for the Ukrainian aid, military aid specifically. Rand Paul didn't vote. Yeah, you got one job, buddy. It's to vote. And he did not go with yes or no. He just didn't show up for that vote. In the House, Thomas Massie and Jamie Comer were the only ones who voted against Ukrainian military aid. So I guess they bought the Kremlin's lies and prefer to wait until Russia attacks a NATO ally to really put time and energy into military in Eastern Europe. Speaking of Jamie Comer, we don't really like to do that, but he has apparently been overheard telling his colleagues that he's done with the whole impeachment thing. So glad that you finally got there, Jamie. Maybe you could have not even gone there and just not wasted everyone's time and energy on finding President Biden guilty of absolutely nothing except for, having a son with fairly questionable decision making. So really just outrageous that the guy spent so much time and energy, but he really built his national profile into that of a big clown. So hopefully that will make his reelection fight a lot harder for him. If folks missed it, we had Erin Marshall, who was running against Jamie Comer for that district on a couple of weeks ago, I think. Go back and listen if you missed it. She's phenomenal, young, single mom, working really hard to bring the issue of choice to that federal race, which I think is really, really important since President Trump and his Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So really putting that issue where it matters most, for sure. So, and on another federal issue, our Attorney General, Russell Coleman, is leading a group of 24 other attorneys general and suing the EPA over greenhouse gas emission standards, which will lead to car companies selling more EVs. Kind of an odd decision by the Attorney General. In his press release, which is just super inflammatory, and he's clearly decided that EVs should be part of the culture war and appeal to his, MAGA base. He fails to mention that Kentucky will soon have more jobs in the EV and battery manufacturing industry than in the coal industry. He also points out that Ford lost money on EVs last year, while failing to mention that Ford actually supports the regulations. So Ford thinks the EPA is doing the right thing, but Attorney General Coleman disagrees. But they like to call these like an EV mandate, but the way the rule really works is that the automakers need to sell more zero emission vehicles, likely EVs. No one is going to make you buy an EV. It will be up to the auto industry to produce cars that folks want to buy. No one's taking away your gas powered car, but wouldn't it be nice to never go to a gas station again? If you're not familiar with EVs, 80% of your driving will be you'll be charging at home for that. Every once in a while you'll go on a long road trip and you'll need to pull over and use one of the new chargers that are being developed right now through the Biden administration's investments in the NEVI program. But 80% of the time you're not going to a gas station. You're just charging at home. So you'll save money every month on your fuel bill. You'll have a quiet, fast car to drive. I tell you what, I'm not going to make anyone buy an EV, but I might be on board for making people take test drives in an EV. Like, just check it out before you listen to Fox News about how they're horrible. And if you think they don't work in the cold, you should talk to my friend who is the director of transportation for the school district in Nome, Alaska. He's had an electric school bus for about 7 years, and it's not missed a single day of school yet. So they work very dependably in the cold. So at any rate, that's my sales pitch for EVs. Now we're going to move on to our final story for News of the Week, and it's kind of a big one about next week's show. Doug, what do you got?
Can I say a couple of things about your story?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. You noted that Rand did not vote on the funding bill for Ukraine and Israel and Gaza and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to couple that with Comer. Or let me just say couple that with Andy Barr. What Andy Barr likes to do is to vote against like a spending bill and then go present money and say, Here's your money. Well, what Rand did, he can say to somebody who supports funding or is against funding for Ukraine, he can say, I didn't vote. Or if he's talking to somebody from Israel, he's not going to say which way he voted, but if he just didn't vote, then, he can ride that fence.
You can have it both ways.
Yeah. And on Comer, I thought he had the goods on the stuff. He doesn't have the goods?
Apparently, he does not have the goods.
Well, that's wild.
Very, very shocking.
A politician who lied or stretched the truth. Okay, so the next story, right? I'll jump into that.
All right.
We are 1 month away from the primary election, and with competitive primaries in the 29th, the 46th, the 56th, and the 93rd, there are lots of reasons to head to the polls and go vote on May the 21st. Next week, we'll be hosting the Kentucky 6th Congressional District Democratic Primary Forum right here on Kernels of Truth. We've got confirmations from every registered candidate, so it's a great opportunity to see how they shake out and see if they deserve your vote over the current incumbent, previously mentioned guy who likes to hand out the checks after not voting for the checks, Andy Barr. Speaking of Barr, he was dragged last week by Katie Porter when he defended higher bank fees. I wonder why you defend higher bank fees. That's right, our congressman defended big bank fees during a congressional hearing over the Biden administration's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau efforts to control bank fees. And you know what they say, why somebody would rob a bank, that's where the money is. And I guess Andy Barr knows that banks have money and they do give money to politicians who help them perhaps get higher bank fees.
I think that's a fair assessment, and we should pull up his donor record, but I got to imagine it is lousy with big banks. You don't get to be the chairman of the Financial Services Committee without getting to know a few banks and getting them to know your campaign account.
Yeah, and I kind of got off track there. I'm sorry for that. Sometimes I go unscripted, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But anyway, you can see the clip there from Katie Porter getting after Andy Barr. And if you would prefer someone a bit more in touch with their constituents and less enamored with big banks, tune in next week to hear from the 5 candidates campaigning to take on Barr. Randy Cravens, Todd Kelly, Don Pratt, Jonathan Richardson, and Shauna Rudd. That's my story.
That's exciting. We're doing the 6th Congressional District Democratic Primary or Forum right here on Kernels of Truth. That's exciting. So I hope everyone tunes in, put it on your calendar, because if you're like me, you don't really know that much about these candidates who are running for Congress. But as we can see with that clip, voting for Andy Barr is a little unseemly. All right, so let's do our call to action. Get you active, folks. So we cannot have you call the nicest humans on earth anymore because there's no more legislative actions to comment on. So for Earth Week, let us speak up for rooftop solar. Let's urge the Kentucky Public Service Commission to support more rooftop solar deployment by keeping the rates they pay homeowners fair. Right. So if you don't know how this works, if you've never really thought about solar, if you put solar panels on your house, you spend the money to do that, or you do some collaboration with a company, you will get credit for the solar energy that you generate that goes back to the grid, and it's not used by you at that time. Like, so say you leave your house and you're not using any energy, but the sun's shining, so you're putting energy back into the grid. You get credit for that energy. It's usually been about a 1-to-1 traditionally. They did, the legislature passed a bill to try to claw that back. And so now it's a little bit less than 1-to-1, but it's still a good deal. Now, I think LG&E and KU are trying to change how they do the math for rooftop solar credits. And it's basically to make it less valuable for you as a homeowner, which of course is what they want. They don't really want to give you the full credit for your energy, despite the fact you just saved them from having to build any more capacity to generate energy. So this is really quick. It's an alert from our friends at Kentuckians for Energy Democracy. It just takes a couple of minutes to send a message. The link should be in the chat, and it is also in the show notes. You'll see it on the screen right there. I'm not going to read it because you won't remember, but you can find it in our show notes or in our comments. So let's do it. It's really quick. That's what I got.
Okay. You want me to close the show out?
Let's do it. I think we might have set a record for the fastest show ever.
I think we have, but we gave a lot of really good information.
A lot of good information.
Yes.
For sure. Thank you for that exhaustive list of the 10, we think, worst bills of the Kentucky General Assembly. Everyone get out there and vote.
Yes. Vote. And you can vote lots of times. Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State and organized as a 501c4. We are affiliated with the Indivisible Project, the Commonwealth Alliance for Voter Engagement, commonly referred to as CAVE, and are also proud members of the Forward Kentucky Network. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, and increase voter turnout and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. In 1 week, Progress Kentucky is proud to announce we'll be hosting a 6th District Democratic primary candidate forum May 1st. Join us for an informative time and learn more about the candidates. Production of episode 159 was by the wonderful and cherished Annabel Nagel. Big thanks to Nate Orshan, who wrote and performed our theme song. You can find more information and music at natetosong.com. If you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook or YouTube, audio podcasts and our show notes are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you do listen to the pod, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening right now. Logo and some graphic content provided by Couchfire Media. More information can be found at couchfiremedia.com. Hope to see you next week.